Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today, since it is tax season, we're talking about tax documents for employees versus contractors. We got W-2s and 1099s. That's how we often refer to employees versus contractors. A lot of times, instead of calling someone an independent contractor, you'll call them a 1099. So just talking about those types of documents that you'd have to be providing to those employees at this time of year. It's kind of a good time to stop and think about that classification. If you're issuing 1099s to folks, are they properly classified, or should you be issuing them W-2s? What are some things to keep in mind, Russell?
Yeah, I mean, and I know we've talked about it multiple times before, but I think it bears repeating because it's such a big issue is, do you have the worker properly classified as W-2 or 1099? In the spirit of tax season, the IRS has a test for that. But so do all the other laws, the unemployment, the workers' comp, the wage and hour. There's different versions of the test, but to shorthand it, all the tests have a lot to do with how much control the business exerts over the worker. So if the business is telling the worker when to work, where to work, how to work, giving them the equipment, the tools of the trade to do the work, supervising the work, in certain cases might be paying for the work hourly as opposed to, paying an invoice for the work. Those are the kinds of things that a court will look at, or the IRS may look at and say, hey, this person's really a W-2 employee, not an independent contractor. And in the construct of tax, that has certain obligations because you should have been paying, if you've misclassified, you should have been paying the workers the employer portion of the payroll tax. And that's been shifted to the employee or the worker when they're classified as a 1099. But there's other, so that's one of the things that I think can really cause some problems. So obviously, the ship has kind of sailed on this tax season. But while we're thinking about it, while we're thinking about paying taxes, it makes sense to say, hey, you know what, maybe I need to revisit those classifications.
Yeah, and it's a good time to, anytime that there's something where you're actually looking at this and looking at your workforce, it's always a good time to take a look at that. And I get a lot of questions from employers when we're looking at classification issues. Well, what's the problem if I do misclassify them? And it depends on kind of, what they would have been otherwise, if they would have been an exempt employee versus a non-exempt employee, should have been being paid hourly. But it's also, the tax part is a big part of this, because when you classify someone as 1099 and not as an employee, the state's not getting their cut as it relates to unemployment and things like that. So actually, when an employee leaves and files unemployment and says, hey, I was, even if you classified them as a 1099 contractor, often you'll terminate them if they're misclassified and they seem like an employee and they feel like an employee. They'll go to the unemployment office and be like, hey, I was an employee, I would like unemployment now. And if, and that's a huge red flag, because then the state goes, well, this person's not on your roster as an employee, and now they're asking us to pay them unemployment. So what's going on here? And that's a big time. So when you're not paying unemployment taxes, that can be a big part of a misclassification issue.
Yeah. And the other point I wanted to make is that it applies in a lot of contexts. So we think in terms of businesses and workers, but it can apply elsewhere. It can apply to home health care, or nanny service in your home, or the cleaning service that may come to your home. The income levels for converting someone from a 1099 to a W-2 in those circumstances are pretty low. So it's definitely something to be conscious of and say, maybe I should be doing this differently. Maybe I should think about this a little bit differently than I have.
Yeah, vendors you might use personally and stuff are definitely things that people don't always think about. That's a good point, Russell. Well, thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.